Hey, what's up, y'all? So, I got a real good question today from somebody in my DM, and they asked me what my thoughts were on universal basic income. So, for some of y'all that follow me or either on Instagram or Facebook, y'all probably seen me post about Andrew Yang, who I'm a big fan of. He's a 2020 presidential candidate. He talks about UBI a lot. He's actually talking about a plan that he's dubbed the Freedom Dividend, where essentially he gives, or he's going to give, every American citizen $1,000 per month as just a stipend for being an American citizen. So very similar to if you own like a blue chip stock like GE, just for owning that stock or being a shareholder, you get a dividend typically once a quarter. So part of his plan is to give all American citizens the Freedom Dividend, which is basically a UBI or Universal Basic Income plan for all citizens. So the question I got was just what my take is on UBI, what I thought of it. And so it's a real complicated topic, and it's something that I think actually is really, really important, because the reason why people are even talking about UBI right now is because the country is going through a significant economic shift. And if you got kids like I do, this is going to be the type of question that's going to dictate a lot of what the world looks like to them when they become adults. So it's something that I think that more people should be asking about, more people should be talking about. So I wanted to kind of break down my take on UBI in general, and I want to speak specifically about Andrew Yang's program and his initiative around UBI. So just to start, right, what is UBI? Universal Basic Income. And really, to put in a very simple terms, is it is a group of people, whether it's people in a country, a state, or a region, that are getting a typically monthly income from the government. And the whole idea around UBI is to essentially make sure that people can cover their most basic needs. So make sure that people are not going to starve on a monthly basis, or make sure that people can get their car fixed if they have a repair need, so that they don't get fired from their job and lose their income, right? So it's just a matter of, or initiative to make sure that people are taken care of on their most basic needs. And the great thing about UBI, and probably the main reason why I'm a fan of UBI as a concept, is the fact that it helps get people out of a survival mindset and into a thriving mindset, right? So when you are just trying to figure out or make sure that you're going to be able to eat and that your rent's going to get paid, you are in absolute survival mode. And when you're in that mode, just as a citizen of a country, you can't contribute in the same way as someone that's thinking about thriving type of things, whether it be developing themselves, getting educated, starting a business, whatever the case may be, right? That's a thriving mindset. And it's very hard to be in that mindset if you're just trying to survive. So I'm a fan of UBI for that basic reason alone. I think any society or country where people are, or more people are able to think about thriving versus just surviving, that's a good thing for everybody. So I'm definitely a fan of UBI as a concept. The trick with UBI always comes down to two questions. Number one is, how do we pay for it? And two is, who gets it and who doesn't? So the second question, Andrew Yang answers very simply, which is everyone gets it. Every American citizen gets it. And he does that probably not because he thinks everyone deserves it, because he knows that if he makes it exclusive to one group of people, it'll probably never get passed in our society, in our country. So in order to make it an initiative that will more likely actually see the light of day, which is incredibly smart, he's making it or framing it as a dividend for simply being a citizen of the United States, which is dope, by the way. Now, as far as how to pay for it, this is where things get more complicated. And this is where I really want to break this down, because in order for you to really understand the significance of what he's proposing, you have to understand the context behind why he's even proposing a UBI right now in the first place. So let me break down exactly how he plans to pay for this program. And it's really the main reason why I'm a fan of his program specifically, because there's different ways to apply UBI, right? But his proposal, I think, is the best that I've seen. So he is proposing to pay for the UBI program in the states by way of a VAT, which is a value added tax. Now, if you don't know what a VAT is, it is essentially a type of tax. But the best way that I can explain to you what VAT is to give you an analogy of what it's not by the form of a sales tax, right? Which everyone is probably familiar with the sales tax, right? You walk into a 7-Eleven, you pick up a bottle of tea. Yes, I'm going to use tea for obvious reasons. You pick up a bottle of tea. Let's say it's Snapple, whatever. You go to the counter, you pay for that tea. It's say $1.99, but then when they ring it up, it's $2.25 because of tax, right? That's a sales tax. And that's the system of tax primarily we have here in the States, as well as income tax, right? So the thing to understand about sales tax is it's only applied at the end of the value chain, meaning the end consumer that buys the goods is who wears, or I should say, holds the 100% brunt of the tax burden for that product, right? So when you buy a finished good, that finished bottle of tea with the label already applied, with the tea mixed in, it's ready to sell, it's ready to be consumed. You're the last step in the value chain. So therefore you have 100% responsibility for the tax that's associated with that particular good, right? And I'm emphasizing value chain for a reason. So that's a sales tax. A VAT tax, or a value added tax, is different in the sense that it is taxed throughout the entire production process of that bottle of tea or any other produced good, right? So today, in our current tax structure here in the USA, as a company owner, when you buy the bottle for the tea, the sugar, the water, and the label, all of the cap, all of the materials that go into that bottle of tea, most companies don't pay taxes on none of that shit. Right. So that's one way that companies are able to circumvent paying their fair share of taxes, which is what contributes to the government's ability to operate. And they do that by way of being tax exempt. Right. So a VAT would basically take that away. So with a VAT applied, which is what Andrew Yang is proposing, Snapple would have to pay taxes on that label that they purchase, the bottle, the cap, the tea, the sugar, all that. Right. So that's the fundamental difference between the VAT and just having a sales tax. It forces companies to contribute their fair share of taxes on a particular product or good. So, of course, and by the way, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, if we charge companies tax on the raw materials of their products, then they're going to pass that cost on to the consumer. And that's a very valid point, but that can also be very easily addressed. Right. The whole idea is today the consumer is shouldering 100% of the tax responsibility when they buy a good. The companies are not holding any of that liability. Right. So the idea is let's have some shared responsibility, both on part of the consumer as well as the company, in terms of contributing to the tax base. And we're going to talk about why that's significant in a minute. But that's the whole idea around a VAT, is it makes it more difficult for companies to circumvent paying their fair share of taxes. Now, why is this significant right now? And why is Andrew Yang proposing the importance of a VAT right now? And the best way that I can explain this, and I need you guys to really do me a favor as you hear this part of this video, is I want you to put yourself in the mind of a business owner, which I really wish more people would have the opportunity to either run a business or start a business, because so much around our politics and our government in general is dictated by corporations. So having that experience will give you a lot more insight into how some of this stuff works. But for the sake of this example, to make this very clear, I want you guys to imagine that you own this tea company. Let's say it's Snapple. I'm going to use that as a very simple example, right? Let's say you sell your tea for $3 a bottle, right? You understand that you're not going to get that full $3 back, right? That's your gross revenue. That's not your net revenue. So you sell it for $3, but there's a whole bunch of expenses that has to come out of that $3 before you get your profit, right? You got to pay for the bottle. You got to pay for the label. You got to pay for the tea. You got to pay for the cap. You got to pay for the transportation to get the bottle from your facility to the store. You got to pay for the person making the tea. You got to pay for the person selling the tea. So there's all these expenses associated with selling that $3 bottle of tea that has to be subtracted from your profits before you make anything, if you make anything, right? And all of those expenses can be classified in a couple ways. Now, if you've taken an accounting class, you've probably learned about fixed costs versus variable costs. I'm not going to talk about that because it's not relevant to this example. But what I do want to talk about is expenses that contribute to tax revenue and expenses that do not contribute to tax revenue. So we already talked about some expenses that don't contribute to tax revenue, right? We already said that companies are typically tax exempt, so they don't pay taxes on bottles or teas or the sugar, right? Those raw materials, they don't pay taxes on none of that. So none of that contributes to the tax base for the country. But you know what does contribute to the tax base? People. So if you as a business owner go out and hire someone to produce your tea in your factory, or you hire someone to stand behind a table and sell your tea in a store, you're paying those people by way of wages, and those wages are taxable. So when you hire people, and when those expenses within your company are tied to people, that is generating tax revenue for the government. But when you buy equipment and materials, they're not. They don't contribute to tax revenue. And here is why this whole program right now is significant. If you had a $20 million company 30 years ago, you probably would have about 50 employees in that company to yield $20 million, right? Between your salespeople and your production and your accounting, all that marketing, you'd have about, say, maybe 50 people to run a $20 million company. Let's just say 50. It could be more than that. It could be less. But fast forward till 2019, that same company, to get to $20 million, may only need half of that amount of people. They may only need 25 people. And that's typically what's happening now, is companies are able to reach a certain revenue or profit level with less people than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now, why is that? Technology, right? If you go into a typical manufacturer in the United States today, 30 years ago, they may have had 50 people in that plant. Now they may have 10. And a lot of those other 40 people have been replaced by machines, right? So technology is making it so that companies don't need as many humans to produce the same amount of goods or generate the same amount of revenue as before. So hopefully you're seeing the significance of all this, right? Companies are making more money than they've ever made before, and the expenses that they pay are increasingly becoming a mix of expenses that don't contribute to tax revenue, right? So, and by the way, all of this is great. These technological advances are absolutely great. They're going to make everything cheaper. They're going to make it cheaper for you to buy TVs and cars and phones. All of this is great progress, and we should continue to allow technology to do its thing. The problem is we have a tax and a government system that's like 30, 40 years behind. And all Andrew Yang is basically saying is, look, we need a tax structure, which basically is a VAT, that will allow our country as a whole to benefit from this technological shift that has replaced human beings as the primary resource for companies and is now shifted to technology. Because there's no way currently for the tax system to effectively get the tax revenue from this current model of business that is, again, more dependent upon technology than human beings. He's saying a VAT tax would essentially resolve that problem, right? So when a company opts to hire or buy a robot versus hire 10 people, guess what? That robot is essentially going to be paying taxes in the same way or in a similar way as a human being would. Right. So that's what a VAT does. And by the way, we are one of the last company or countries that are developed that do not have a VAT in place. Right. Now, we can speculate why that is. I have my theories, but the reality is the USA is in the extreme minority of developed countries that does not have a VAT system. So there's a need for UBI right now based on all of the displacement that's going to happen over the next 20 years. 10 to 20 years, actually, around technology replacing entire industries. And so there's many other reasons around UBI and the definition of work and all that kind of stuff that Andrew Yang talks about, which I also agree with. But I wanted to just explain the context around UBI and why I am a fan of it myself personally. and why all y'all should check out UBI and check out Andrew Yang. So, peace.